So it's Professor Andy Neely. I'm Director of the Cambridge Service Alliance at the University of Cambridge.
Thank you. Our first question would be, from your research and experience, which are the main challenges that organizations face when implementing a performance management system?
So I think the main challenges organizations face when implementing measurement systems fall into a number of different categories. So there are some around technology, around accessing good data, around, particularly in large organizations, integrating measurement systems across the world. There are some challenges around people issues, human issues, so getting people to buy into the measurement system, getting them to accept it, getting them to use the data, managing by fact. There are some issues around just choosing what to measure. If you think about the number of different things people could measure today, given the ease of accessing some data and given the amount of data that's being generated by the Internet of Things, Web 4.0, we can measure more and more. So how do you choose the limited set of things that really matter for the organisation? And I think there's a challenge about then sustaining and developing the measurement system. So as the organisation changes, how do I change and upgrade the measurement system to make sure it stays relevant to the business?
At the KPIinstitute, we are very interested in assessing the state of performance management as a discipline every year. So could you please tell me if you can think of some key trends for the year 2014?
So for 2014, I think undoubtedly the biggest trend is around the whole question of big data and the explosion of data sources, types of data people are looking at, the rate at which data is being generated, and trying to get insight from that data. And increasingly what we see is it's no longer data from just within the firm, but it's data from all sorts of sources. So people are very interested in social media. How do I use data on Twitter or Facebook to get feedback from customers about my products and services? So that explosion of data, in many ways 2014 will go down as one of the years that big data really came of age.
If you are to think of 3 pieces of advice you would provide to companies in order to implement an effective and efficient performance management system, what would be these advices be?
Okay. So if I gave you 3 pieces of advice, the first would be being really clear about your strategy and therefore the measures that you want to use that are aligned with the strategy and that drive the right behaviours. I often draw a triangle which links measures, strategy and behaviour and says that actually you need to think about the behavioural consequences of the measures and whether they will drive the right decisions and actions to allow you to execute the right strategy. So that's the first thing, framing it in a strategic context. The second piece of advice would be about using measurement systems sensibly with people inside the organisation. So using the measurement system more as a learning than a control system. I think too often organisations see measures and targets as a control system. I'll set you a target. If you're not delivering, I'll hold you to account. The problem with that is it provokes quite defensive behaviour. And if you think of measurement as a learning system and you say actually the data provides me insight into what's happening and how we can improve performance, then it becomes a more valuable process. And the third piece of advice, I would talk about performance planning rather than performance measurement or performance review. So making sure that our conversations about performance are forward-looking, planning where we want to be or thinking about where we want to be and how we might get there, rather than simply reviewing where we were today and why we ended up in that position.
Other than these 3 advices, could you think of something else that companies could perform in order to ensure they have a very effective performance management system in place?
So I think a key thing is involving engaging people in the design and the deployment of the system and then the governance of it. So often measurement feels to many people like it's something that's done to them. My boss measures my performance and I provide information to my boss. Instead, you need to people need to feel they are involved and engaged in the process of measurement and that the data that's being generated is useful for them to do their job. So thinking about a more people-centric version of performance measurement where you really involve the staff and the people in the organisation is a crucial thing to get right if you're going to make measurement successful.
What about the management's involvement?
So I think management plays a fundamental role there in the leadership of that process. So if you've got managers that use measurements only for their purposes, then I think it can make measurement more threatening for people inside the organisation, and then you often end up with less good data, more politics around the measurement and so on. So management plays a really important, in fact more than management, leadership plays a really important role in enabling or in setting the conditions, if you like, in the organisation to make sure that measurement works well.
What do you think of the importance of aligning the performance management system throughout the organization, from the organizational to departmental individual level?
So I think the question of alignment's an interesting one. It's difficult to do in practice, particularly in very heterogeneous organisations. So if you've got an organisation that's doing the same thing in location after location after location, it's relatively easy to align the measurement system within the operational part of the business. So take a supermarket, a retail outlet. In a retail outlet, I've got branch after branch after branch doing effectively the same thing, selling goods. I can get an aligned measurement system there. But even in that environment, then the things that marketing does, or IT does, or HR does, they're often support functions that allow the store to do its job, but you need a different set of metrics for the support functions that look at how well they are supporting the store to do their job. In those environments, that's a relatively easy thing to do. If you end up with a very heterogeneous organisation where you've got lots of diverse activity, then getting that sort of clear alignment from the top to the bottom of the organisation around the metrics is incredibly challenging because of the diversity of the organisation. And so in some ways you might be better there thinking of it at the business unit level and saying, actually, I'm going to try and drive alignment within my business units rather than across the entire organisation.
Can you provide us with some examples from your experience and your research of companies or maybe industries or sectors that have performed really well in this field that can be used as an example of good practices due to their results?
Yep. So I think one of the best examples I've seen is a smallish company called WF Electrical in the UK. They had a measurement system where they measured all of their branches as profit centres. They had about 100 branches, and for 5 years in a row that drove really good growth inside the organisation. So sales grew, margins grew and so on. But then they found the branches had started to compete with each other for customers. And so they changed their measurement system and they adopted a much broader range of measures and said to the branches, actually we want you to be service centres rather than just profit centres. So we still want you to worry about sales, but we also want you to worry about customer service, about employee satisfaction and so on. And actually they made a really significant culture change inside the organisation, driving much more collaboration across the branch network and creating a much more successful organisation as a result.
Now my final question is more related to the personal performance. In the last few years there is an emerging trend of measuring with different instruments the personal performance, like calorie counters or different types of measurement instruments. What do you think of this trend? What is the utility of measuring your personal performance?
So I think it's a really interesting trend around the whole wearable technology, and so and then linking that back to what other people are doing. So I do a little bit of running, and I've got one of the smartwatches, and so when I run, I'll record the distance I've run, where I've run. When I go home, we'll upload that to the web, and I quite like having the history of where I've run, being able to compare times. But also, if I'm in a different city, I can go and look on the map of the city and see where other people have run in that city because they've uploaded their data, and I can spot good routes to go and run. So you end up with a sort of social process of sharing information, not necessarily about how fast they've run, but about where they might run, which informs other runners. So I think what we're seeing with the personal measurement is more control to the individual to allow you to monitor the things that matter to you, but then also the infrastructure to share some of that information to others in a social form, in a social network, which makes the information more valuable to everybody. So I think it's a good and an interesting development for people.
I have even seen the balanced scorecard methodology adapted to the personal level. So do you think this could also be something about setting targets and achieving the desired state of evolution in your personal development?
So I think there's a question about how individuals want to, how formal they want to make their own system. I mean, many people have things they'd like to achieve in life. There's a lovely case recently in the UK of somebody who was very sadly dying of cancer, and he put together what was called a bucket list of things he wanted to do before he died, and as he was doing those, he was raising money for cancer charities. You wouldn't want a balanced scorecard in that context, but he had a set of things that he wanted to do. So I think having some sense of what makes you happy and what you want to do with your life is important, without getting too obsessed by it. You can get too obsessed by targets and goals at an individual level, and if you get too focused on them, you can lose sight of some of the other things that matter in life. So getting a balance between being driven but also enjoying life is important.
Are there any final considerations you would like to add regarding performance management?
So I think it's a fascinating area. I think it's really interesting to see how this field's developed over the last 20 or so years that I've been looking at it, but there's a longer history as well of developments. And the way that technology, the people issues, the social issues and the organisational issues are coming together, I think makes this a really interesting area to study and work in years to come.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.